Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English. Excited to be with you as always. Joined by, I think we're making this a regular thing, Anna. Joined by Anna Delaski, our video reporter. She does excellent work on Instagram and YouTube and X, debunking all the nonsense that people believe. It's absolutely ridiculous.
No complaints here. I'm enjoying the conversation.
We have a special guest with us. Every once in a while, we like to bring someone on who does this science communication stuff for a living to give us some feedback on what works, what doesn't, how many times they've been called a corporate shill, just to have a good conversation. So we're joined by Dr. Jess Steier. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, I imagine a lot of people that listen to us know who you are, but for the folks that don't, just give us a brief introduction. Who you are, what do you do, etc.
Okay, I'll be brief. Tell me if you want more information. I am a public health scientist. My training is actually in evaluation science, so using data to evaluate health programs and policies. And we may talk about this more, but early in the pandemic, it became clear that there was a need for science communication, and I started doing it, and that's how Unbiased Science was born. It actually started out me on my personal Facebook page answering questions for my mom and her friends, and then started getting requests from strangers. And I was like, no, let's keep this. I don't need strangers seeing my children and all that. So started Unbiased Science, and so through Unbiased, we do all kinds of science communication. We have a podcast, we do social media infographics, long form content, and yeah, we've been busy these days.
So I've been doing this for a long time, but it took on a real personal interest when my kids were born. So I have two young kids, they're both under 5, and all of a sudden everything on this planet scared the hell out of me. It's just, everything tries to kill your kids, it seems.
Yep.
And it was incredibly frustrating because there's real concerns that parents have to have. Food allergies, choking, car accidents, like stuff that can really harm your kids. And then there's just this endless stream of nonsense that proliferates on social media that is, like, I don't know, surgically engineered to scare parents. It's so incredibly frustrating. It sounds like you have quite a bit of experience with that. Is that commonly what you see as you're doing your work?
Oh my gosh, yes. So there's a term for this, and you're probably familiar with it, but it's the risk perception gap. And we tend to focus on these really specific things like individual ingredients or additives in foods and, super rare adverse events after vaccination, and not enough on the things that we know actually meaningfully, impact our health. And yes, to your point, like parents, we're getting that double time because it's for us, but then it's also for our children. And yeah, every time I open up my social media, it's like, this is killing us, this ingredient in your cupboards is toxic and you're poisoning your children. And then I think this moment that we're in with movements like the MAHA movement have really exacerbated that. So yeah, it is all the rage.
What I really enjoy about your posts, especially on Instagram, what I think resonates, at least with me as a mom too, is that you take all of these complex topics and you add the nuance that I think a lot of people tend to forget. It's either black or white in the mom groups on Facebook and Instagram. And then you chime in and you go, wait a minute, here's why, this is a misconception. Can you talk about that? Because that takes a lot of work to sort of delve into each topic and make sure that you're being understood by the masses.
So I am so grateful that you picked up on that and that you appreciate that because, we are definitely living in a moment of oversimplification of everything is black and white, all good, all bad, this food is toxic, this is some, panacea that's going to save us all and we're all going to live really long lives. But of course, the reality for those of us who understand science is that everything is nuanced, and that's really boring and unsexy, right? And I think a reason why that's boring and unsexy is because it's not as actionable for people, right? What the oversimplification does is it tells you if you do this or if you eat this, your quality and quantity of life will improve, right? We're saying, well, for some people under certain conditions that, there's all that. But I think that the nuance is so important because I think that the pandemic changed a lot for people, and I feel like the curtain has been lifted on science, and now I have people who have zero background in science or medicine who are asking for things like double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, and it was become really apparent to me, and it backed up by data that I could share more about, but people want to know not just the what, they want to know the why, the how do you know this? Why are you saying this? What is leading you to draw this conclusion? And I think it checks out with, like I mentioned, the data that I've seen where people, so I don't know if you saw, I think it was an Edelman Trust Barometer, where people were asked to rank who do you trust to give you accurate information about science, health, technology, or something like that.
Sure.
And people ranked their peers on par with scientists. And so for me, that's telling me like people really want to be let in on the process. They don't want to be talked down to. They want the respect of the nuance. So I think it's also just a part of being an effective science communicator.
Give us a couple examples, if you would, of the sorts of issues that come up over and over again. Of course, like the food additives thing is just a perennial issue, especially now with Kennedy doing what Kennedy does. Any kind of chemical, if it's a chemical and it's synthesized in a lab, it's going to make your kids be born naked and illiterate and, light your hair on fire. Give us some specifics of what you deal with.
The biggest thing right now, well, putting vaccines aside, I spend a lot of my time on vaccines, and that's its own thing we could talk about. But the thing right now in this moment is the Environmental Working Group just dropped their Dirty Dozen list. If you're familiar with it, it's the list of 12 dirty, terrible fruits and vegetables that are going to kill you and your children because they did testing, and every single fruit and vegetable that they tested has minute trace levels of pesticides that, have no clinically meaningful impact, that are so many orders of magnitude lower than any risks, safety threshold that we've established, that if you run your apple under your faucet, will get rid of those, trace amounts. So that's a big one for me, this push toward organic foods over conventional. I always say I'm into the produce, not the label. I don't care if you're buying organic. I don't care if you're buying conventional. Eat more fruits and veggies. It doesn't matter. There's also this idea of, like you said, additives, like the red dye came up a lot last year. I'm sure you saw that. And it follows a pattern. And the pattern is that people will take these, they're real studies, but they're in vitro or they're preclinical studies that are conducted in rats who are exposed to, 1,000 times the levels of red dye that we'd ever be exposed to, right, in our diet. And so people are extrapolating what these, the findings from these in vitro preclinical studies, and they're assuming that it's going to translate to humans. So that's a very big theme, like taking real studies, but non-human studies, and then fear-mongering based on those studies when we don't have human data to support them. And then just going back one sec to the Dirty Dozen example that I gave, that falls under this appeal to nature fallacy that we see time and time again, where if it's natural, it's better for us. Anything manufactured or produced is inherently, bad for us or poisoning us, which of course we know is not true.
There's such a great point you brought up about this sort of preliminary research. There is a role for this kind of work.
100%.
But I think what people don't understand is that this is like hypothesis generating. So like my favorite example from last month was a study where they took a strain of rodents that they're bred to develop Alzheimer's. They make these animals to develop Alzheimer's, and then this research group just shoved these rats, or just stuffed their guts full of glyphosate, like 12,000. I did the math, 12,000 times the acceptable daily intake. And then people get on X, these influencers, whatever their grift is, and they go, look, we have clear data that this herbicide causes Alzheimer's. I'm like, yeah, but you forgot to carry a 1, and then by the way, the animals are going to get sick regardless. So stuff like that just drives me up the wall. What are your thoughts?
Here. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's a common thread. I see that for a million different things. And it creates these clickbait headlines, right? And then oftentimes, a lot of these influencers who say these things, they will have, discount codes in their link in bio, or they're selling something, of course, we're the shills, yeah. but they're selling something. And just, if I can go off on one maybe minor tangent, you asked, what is a big thing that I'm seeing? There are some just buzzwords du jour that we like. Inflammation, everything is causing inflammation, or microbiome, everything's impacting our microbiome. And here's a test that will tell you, all about your microbiome. And then here's the perfect supplement that is only $180 per month. And it just ignores some very basic, if you had any basic understanding of how the microbiome works, if I take a sip of my soda right now, my microbiome is going to change. It's not a static thing. It's changing constantly. Like, these are not clinically validated things, and they're literally manufactured to create a problem that they then have the solution for. So, maddening.
Go ahead, Anna, if you have a question.
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting because I wonder how much of your job is actually walking back a lot of these like scary headlines, because you talked about clickbait, so how much of your work is actually like, oh, this is true. However, here's why, it's misunderstood, because a lot of your posts do tend to focus on debunking a lot of the myths that, we also align with. That is a big part of our job, is to just educate the public on what the studies they're reading are actually saying.
So I'm always torn with these debunking posts. And it takes a lot. Like, we almost have to hit a certain threshold of, we're seeing this trending, we've received 100 messages in our DMs about this one thing, it's probably worth a response. But then you also run the risk of, if people haven't seen it, you don't want to elevate a falsehood, right? So if it's something like, I think it was a year and a half ago, we must have received, no exaggeration, over 1,000 messages from parents who said that their daughters were getting accosted outside of Stop and Shop because they were selling Girl Scout cookies, and people were saying, you're poison, you're selling poison. So that, I don't know if you saw the headlines about that, like Girl Scout cookies are poisoning us. We saw similar headlines with like Cheerios and oatmeal. And so for those things, it feels like it's easy, because all I have to do is look at the toxicology data and say, okay, unless you're eating 9,000 boxes of Thin Mints, you probably don't need to worry about pesticide exposure,
Yeah.
But I'll say a lot of the work I'm pivoting towards a bit, because there are always going to be these things that crop up every day. Like, I'll open up my Instagram right now and there'll be 1,000 new things, 1,000 new falsehoods. So now we're pivoting toward this pre-bunking. I'm sure you've heard this term, where it's, trying to help people identify the red flags, the themes that we see in these falsehoods, like what we were just talking about, Cam, the, people taking these animal studies and
right.
Extrapolating to humans, or the appeal to nature fallacy, or misunderstanding correlation as causation. And so we're giving them these fundamentals that we hope they can then take to any time they open up social media, no matter the post, they'll be like inoculated, right, against it, and they'd be less likely to believe it, less likely to share it. But yeah, it's challenging.
I saw recently that you had Dr. Michael Siegel on your podcast, and I was so thrilled to see that, because he is, I don't know how to classify him. He just loves upsetting apple carts within his field, and it's not that he's saying anything extravagant. He's just saying, within the field of tobacco control, if we can get people to switch to a safer source of nicotine, that's a good thing. We want fewer people to smoke. And that's all there is to it, right? But he's sort of an outlier in that field, and I find that fascinating, because the data is on his side, and I thought it was really cool of you guys to sit down and have a conversation with him, because very few people will touch this issue within the sort of SciComm world. Everyone wants to talk about vaccines and pesticides, which are important. We talk about them a lot, but very few people want to talk about this. And so maybe you can talk about that discussion you had, and then why you decided to take a swing at this issue.
I love that you're asking this question because I'm so excited that people actually tuned in and are aware of that conversation because it was an important one. So taking a step back, the way that came about, well, taking a big step back, I actually got my start in tobacco control. That's where I got my start. My father, I watched him, slowly die from emphysema over the course of 15 years. So this is near and dear to my heart. And I wrote a Substack recently where I said that sort of reflexively, when e-cigarettes hit the scene, I associated them with big tobacco. And I, as a public health, person, I was like, nope, there's something to do with big tobacco, all bad. Then recently, I got a message on LinkedIn from a consultant who works for one of these vape companies, and I answered the message. And it was like one of these things where I had to. I wanted to understand why was he reaching out? What did he have to say? And it was a great conversation. And he educated me on a lot of things. Like, no, not all e-cigarette companies are owned by big tobacco. And actually, it was started by I think it was a scientist in China who lost their dad to smoking related illness. And similar story, wanted to have a safer alternative for folks. So I wrote this Substack article, and I was absolutely blown away by the negative feedback that I got from the public health community by just acknowledging that for a subset of people, for existing smokers who are looking to quit the habit, e-cigarettes have been shown to be an effective cessation tool. Now, I also in the piece brought up the many problems with e-cigarettes, like the blatant marketing to children with flavors and all that, the lack of regulation here, where we don't limit the amount of nicotine in e-cigarettes, all this and that. And I just couldn't believe the blowback that I got. And Dr. Siegel reached out to me, and he was like, oh, someone is talking about this in public health. No one will touch this with a 10-foot pole. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? It's harm reduction. No one is, like in a perfect world, no one would smoke cigarettes and no one would smoke e-cigarettes, right? But the reality is that thousands of people do smoke, and if there is a way for them to reduce, harm in any way, how are we not talking about that? And last thing, and I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling, I could talk about this for a very long time.
No, go for it, please.
He brought up the point that, we don't have regulation on e-cigarettes, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that public health won't come to the table. We're not willing to have these conversations. We shut it down altogether, and because we're not sitting at the table, we don't have regulation. And if you look at other countries, I think it's the UK does a really great job. They limit the amount of nicotine. They have limits on marketing. They do it in a way where e-cigarettes are marketed as a cessation tool and not as like a hobby that teens should pick up. And it's just really frustrating. And the last thing I'll say, I'm so sorry if I can, is I had something very similar happen where I wrote a piece recently on masks. And I said, from a public health disease transmission perspective, masks, especially high quality N95 type masks, are incredible. And I mask on planes, I mask when I'm at the doctor's office, but I don't mask all the time. And I acknowledge that there are other factors that we weigh as humans. We're not all just public health robots, right? There's other factors that go into our decision making. I have a daughter who has speech issues and she needs to see my mouth when I'm speaking. I find that masks do impede my social interactions. So it's a harm reduction. It's like, why does it have to be all or none? And it's very, very, very frustrating that it feels like, I always say, the call is coming from inside the house. Like, it's our own community that seems to be like just so very judgmental when it comes to this conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, Cam, because we've touched harm reduction with the 10-foot pole, and we've done it a lot. We recently did a video that talked about changes in the last decade on harm reduction and electronic cigarettes. So we've done a lot of work on it. But you said something earlier about staying away from the topic of big tobacco. But then something happened where you pivoted, and when the facts change, you change your mind is sort of what comes to mind. But I think a lot of people are scared to do that, and especially in the field you speak of as why there aren't many changes is because a lot of people are perhaps afraid to admit that, hey, this is doing a lot of good. Maybe we should look into that.
Well, it's like, isn't this the whole purpose of science? Like, we're gathering information and we're drawing conclusions based on the new data that we're gathering. Yeah.
I get. Is there a fear that you might risk losing the public's trust, right? If you change your mind on a certain topic or
100%. People will say, but then you lied to me, and it feels like then like what can we trust? Like you're saying something, but how do we know in a few years you won't completely change your mind? And that's tricky. And I think we need to be transparent in how knowledge evolves. And it is very rare that we'll completely flip our understanding. I mean, at this point in 2026, with our scientific understanding, and the technology and the research that we have and that we've done, I don't think it's likely that I don't think there's a world in which we wake up and it's suddenly like vaccines. You know what? You're right. Vaccines, they're bad. They're causing cancer. They're doing all these things. Like that's not going to happen, right? But there might be little things like maybe we adjust doses, or we give it different times, or we do one dose instead of two, whatever it is. And so it's not an abandonment. It's not that we lied to you, and it's not that science can't be trusted. So again, I think it's just about being transparent, and for the love of God, acknowledging when we don't know something, or we don't have, like people ask me all about like PFAS and forever chemicals. And first of all, that's not my area of expertise. So I'll right away say that, but it's also like, this is thousands of chemicals. I don't really think we have a very clear picture, on PFAS. Like we're learning, we have some, beginnings of ideas, but we don't have all the answers. So I'm sorry. I don't even know if I answered your question on it. Okay, cool.
You did.
What I've found over the years, and I don't have anywhere near your expertise, but having been in the public eye a little bit, it's good to say, I got this one wrong, or I don't know. And this is something I learned from people like Dr. Kevin Folta, or Dr. Liza Lockwood, who I host another podcast with. They're really good within their field. Like they know it backwards and forwards. But if you ask them something about, something they don't know about, they go, I don't know. I don't really study that. But what I learned from that was, it's okay. You don't have to have every answer. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. And we see this on X all the time, right? Like last year, for some reason, everyone became an expert on Winston Churchill. I'm like, I don't know anything about that, so I'm not going to have an opinion, or whatever it is, right? Whether it's in science or not, social media seems to encourage us to just pontificate. And it's really freeing to go, I don't know, and I'm not going to invest the time. I'm going to focus on what I actually do know about. What do you think about that?
I think that makes someone a good science communicator. If you're so sure, if you communicate with total certainty, and you're talking about all the things under the sun with certainty, I'm highly skeptical, right? Because we do, like my training is, I have my own training. I don't know what Kevin Folta knows. I don't know what these other people know, right? Like, and that's why we need to collaborate, and why these conversations are so great. And I would add one thing to that is that I think it's also a strength when we evolve as science communicators. So the example that I give, and I don't know if this is too off topic here, but I hope it's following a thread, that we had a post a couple of years ago that it said, your anecdote is not evidence. And I'm sure you've heard people say this, and it is technically true, right? We know that anecdotes are not evidence. But when I took a step back and I thought about, what is this doing? All that's doing is getting the science people to say, rah, 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 yeah, that's true, your anecdote is not evidence, but it's shutting down the people who I think the message should reach. It's invalidating their lived experience. They're immediately, anything else that comes out of my mouth, they don't trust me. They're saying, this lady, she doesn't believe that that I experienced what I experienced. So instead, I've sort of reframed as, your anecdote is important to you, and it's a data point, but we can't generalize. And I give examples. Like my friend who did I don't know, one diet. It was like the keto diet or something. And he was like, it's amazing. Everyone needs to do it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Did you happen to make any other changes in your life? And he was like, oh, well, now that you say it, I cut out alcohol, and I started walking my dog twice a day. And I'm like, you're describing confounding variables, and this is why we design studies. And it's great that that worked for you, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone else, right? And so, I don't know. I think it's Go on.
Do you think that's why there's so many influencers out there on social media who are drawing from their personal experiences to essentially draw you in to what they're potentially selling, right? Because they'll speak about their own experience, and then you find it relatable, and you go, wait, that happened to me. What did you do about it, right? Well, here's this product, here's the supplement, here's what you need to do. And so many of us tend to forget that the most basic things to health and longevity are just 8 hours of sleep, exercise,
Right.
constant movement,
Yep.
healthy diet, wholesome diet. That's not what they're selling, though. They're selling something beyond that because they're drawing on personal experiences and hoping that you
Yep.
find it relatable.
It
And
is
that's kinda
scary.
scary. It's scary to think how
It
many of
is,
them are
and
out
it's
there.
so highly effective that typically, like one of the red flags I tell people to look out for falsehoods, for misinformation, is did this post evoke a strong emotional response? Because if it did, it might be that your emotions are being used against you, right? Not always the case, of course, but it's for me, it's a red flag. And actually, on the other side of that coin, it's interesting because a lot of us who do science communication, like we're pushed, like it's almost like, should we share more? Should we share, more about our personal stories? And so there's this like line that you walk where you want to feel human, you want to be relatable. Like you don't want to be just a science robot. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I have these other perspectives. So I think that there is 100% something to that emotional, connections that people forge. That's very, very an effective tool for influencers.
Sorry, we'll have to edit that out. My wife and kids are running around. Goodness gracious. Okay. Final. Let's begin to wrap this up. But the thing, and again, going back to being a parent, as you just said, the thing that really bugs me about a lot of this stuff is that it has real world consequences, and we see it in the developing world, like with food security. Like when you scare people, you tell them that GMOs are going to make them infertile or something. That can kill people. It really can. And we're starting to see the same sort of rhetoric take root in the US, and it's been more prevalent in Europe. But when you tell people stuff like this, and you have people in authority doing it, if they forego a measles vaccine, that could be very, very harmful to their children. And this is what bugs me so much, is because you don't want to be a science robot. You don't want to come off as this crazy, angry person, because that backfires too. But at the same time, you're like, you could hurt my kid, and I don't like that at all. So how do you walk that line, if I can formulate a question out of this? How do you balance, like you have to be aggressive sometimes. If someone calls me a corporate shill, I'm going to swing back because I'm not. but you have to be careful. So is there any way to balance all of these different concerns and issues that come up?
Yeah, by the way, I get that shill comment 100 times a day, and have also received death threats. I mean, all kinds of harassment. So this is a very, very real concern. But you're right. I mean, it's difficult to balance the fact that I'm angry, I'm scared. A lot of the things that are happening now have very real consequences. We're seeing it now with an increase in measles, an increase in pertussis, an increase in all of these things that we can prevent. And it feels like we're undoing, decades of incredible public health process. We see it in things like, just to bring up a less important example, but the whole outcry over, red dye and Fruit Loops. And then, we have these performative politics and policies where we're removing food. This is not going to do anything. Will do nothing to meaningfully impact my health, right? Removing red food coloring from my kids' cereal. But I think we have to really remind ourselves. The thing that I tell myself is, the people who are sending those messages, the people who are so sure that I, quote unquote, pharma-shill, and I'm pushing a product on them that's going to kill their kid, right? The vaccines are going to cause cancer, whatever it is. They are products of their own information ecosystem. And it's very hard to remind myself of that. But the mom who chooses not to vaccinate her child thinks she's doing the right thing for her child because that's the information she's being served up. So it's difficult, but if we actually want to meaningfully reach these people, we have to build bridges. We can't shut them out. We have to be a little bit understanding of that. Like, we're living in this age of social media and algorithms, and I don't think that's doing us any favors, right? So it's difficult, but this is such important work. And yeah, I think we just rebuild that trust brick by brick, but it is extremely difficult.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's so good. It's having a conversation like this. It makes you realize that you're not the only one. You're like, oh yeah, I'm normal. I'm not crazy. Other people understand this too. So thank you so much for joining us. Where should people go if they want to find out more about you? The podcast is on every platform, I would imagine, that people consume. Yes. Tell us where to go.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing and for having me. Yeah, Unbiased, we are on all the social media platforms at Unbiased SciPod. We're also on Substack, where I'm really excited to lean into my storytelling. You could find us there at theunbiasedscipod.substack.com. And as you said, our podcast airs every Wednesday on all the platforms, including YouTube, if you want to watch us on video.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. You can follow us as well. We're at ACSH.org on X. Anna does all our work on all our other social media, which is mystical to me. As I get older, I get less and less interested and informed about what's going.
You're younger than I am.
I don't know what to tell you. I'm just going to be sitting on my porch in a rocking chair pretty soon. But we're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. ACSH Matter of Facts. Anna is the face of that, doing all kinds of great videos and infographics. See, that I almost forgot infographics, all kinds of good stuff. Go check all that out. Thank you as always, and we'll see you next time.